All right. Hello and welcome to another season of AFTO's Fresh Take Friday webinar series. I'm your host, Carrie Rigdon, and we're going to be kicking off our series with an inside look at a new cutting-edge inspection standards for reusable packaging. We've got two excellent speakers here with us today, but first, a little housekeeping. So this session is being recorded, and all those who registered will receive a link to the recording as well as a copy of the slide deck in the next few days. And if you have any questions for our speakers, please use them in the Q&A box and we'll address them at the question and answer portion at the end of our session. We ask you to use the QA tool instead of the chat. That just makes it easier for us to see your questions. And if you'd like to ask either during the Q&A or if you'd like to ask a clarifying question during the presentation, please use that raise hand feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen and we'll prompt you to unmute and ask your question. All right, now it is my pleasure to introduce our speakers. Claudette Juska is co-founder and technical director of PR3, where she leads the development of standards for reuse systems. Claudette is a trained engineer and researcher with 20 years experience in the environmental movement. She's an expert in supply chain, seafood, forest products, automobile, fossil fuel, and plastics industries. She has a deep knowledge of the complexities involved in sourcing, manufacturing, and delivering consumer goods, and works to create and promote solutions to environmental and social concerns along the supply route. Joining Claudette is Mason Hines. He's a senior program manager and consensus builder at Resolve and PR3. On behalf of PR3, Mason led Resolve's accreditation as an ANSI accredited standards developer in 2023 and now coordinates the development of 7 foundational standards meant to enable interoperability among reuse systems, maximize efficiencies, and avoid the fragmentation that hampers current waste systems. Mason's background is in conflict resolution and collaborative process design, working to build solutions that improve the wellness of people and the planet. Now I'd like to turn it over to Claudette and Mason.
Thank you so much, Carrie.
Slides good? Just making sure the slides are good.
Oh, no, I thought we saw it for a sec, but now I don't see it.
I see it, Mason, and I think it's fine. Claudette, do you see it?
Yep.
Okay,
Yeah, I see.
Must be on my end. Thank you for that.
Thanks for the introduction, Carrie. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting us. And I'm going to start by saying, like, as Carrie already said, we're from an organization or a project called PR3, which is the Global Alliance to Advance Reuse. And we're part of an organization called Resolve, which is a nonprofit organization. So we come to you today with this work, which is nonprofit work. And our whole mission is to try and help scale reuse systems around the world. And so we've developed a series of tools to help communities and companies and regulators do that. And so I'm going to get to those tools in a minute. But before I do that, I did want to take a minute to really explain reuse. As you see the title here, reuse before recycling, because reuse is quite different than recycling. We wanted to make sure everyone really had a good understanding of what reuse is and what it looks like when it comes to your community. So reuse and recycling are actually two different things, but they're often used interchangeably, and they're really not. I put the formal definitions here. And reuse is what we're talking about today. It's an operation by which a product or packaging is used multiple times, again and again, in its original form, and for the same purpose for which it was conceived, whereas recycling is a remanufacturing process where you take waste and you convert it into new material and a new product. And so, as you're going to see today, we're talking about reuse systems where we reuse things over and over again, and then we recycle them, because recycling is super important, but it's something that should be done after we use products and packaging as many times as we can. And at PR3, we've been really focused on reusable packaging systems. So reuse is happening in textiles, and it's happening in electronics and batteries, but we've really been focused for the last few years on primary packaging systems. So these are systems, reuse systems for packaging that for packaging that touches a product. So primary packaging like cups and bottles and food packaging and shampoo bottles and cleaning product bottles, anything that actually touches a product. We've been focused on that type of packaging. And these systems for reusable packaging are emerging all over the world and all over the United States. And I wanted to take a minute to show you a diagram of how these systems work, because they are indeed systems. So it's not just about redesigning packaging so that it can be reused. It's about building a whole system of infrastructure to actually enable that reuse. So if you look at this diagram here, you'll see at the top, there's an image of a consumer buying a beverage in a cup. And at the point of sale, reuse works very similar to the single-use packaging and product systems that you're used to. She's purchased a cup. But then what happens after consuming the product in the container, the packaging needs to be put into a collection point. And so you'll see to the right there, the next image here is of someone inserting a cup into what we call a collection point. And in this case, it looks just like a waste bin. And in a lot of cases, it does look like a waste bin, but it's labeled for reuse. Other cases, they look different. They look like reverse vending machines, or they can be curbside totes that are collected from curbside. We're going to show you some pictures of that in a minute. But it is indeed, this packaging needs to get back to the system through a collection point. And then at the collection point, the workers come and they collect the packaging. They transport it to a recovery facility where it's washed. And that's the image on the bottom. And this is what we're primarily going to talk to you about today, this washing process and the facilities that are emerging to wash these containers. If the container can't be used again, if it's damaged, it goes to recycling. That's an important piece of the system that these are designed for recycling as well. But assuming the packaging's still good, it's inspected, it's repacked and gotten and ready for distribution. Sometimes it's stored for a while, but eventually it goes either to a new manufacturing facility where it'll be filled with food or personal care or home care product. In other cases, it goes directly back to the point of sale where it's filled at point of sale, if that's a beverage or takeaway food, things like that. So this is what the system looks like. We're going to show you in a minute sort of where in the country these are emerging. But next, my colleague Mason's here going to show you some pictures of what this system looks like. So when you see it, you recognize it.
Yeah, because the diagram is one thing, but we really wanted to kind of put a picture in your mind of what these things look like. And on this slide, we have pictures of reusable packaging. And I hope that my internet is working. I've been having some trouble, so hope you can hear me. As you can see, it really runs the gamut, right? So we have all different kinds of packaging here, all different kinds of materials, plastic, stainless steel, glass, and for different product types. So this one up in the top here is Nesquik. It's a powder. Over here in the corner, we have hand dish soap, and then these other things are wine. And one place where it's really taking off is in food and beverage to go. And also the other thing I wanted to just kind of point out is that you'll see, of course, companies and brands here that you recognize. We have Nestle and we have Coca-Cola, but you'll also see companies that you may not be familiar with. This one here, Bold Reuse, and there's one down here, reusables.com. These are medium or small size enterprises, many of which are emerging around certainly the US and in Canada and really around the world, that are just dedicated to reusable packaging and offering reusables as a service to clients. And there's many different kinds of places where this is happening, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So on to the next note here, as Claudette said, we're going to kind of go through that full diagram she described. These are examples of the collection point. This is the place where the consumer returns the packaging when they're done with it. And you can see, again, there's a whole variety of ways that this looks. In some cases, these are really simple contraptions. They're just a bin or a box or a bag where the reusable container goes. But in other cases, they're pretty sophisticated machines, big reverse vending machines like you see for Cup Loop or for Tomra. And they're integrating some really cool technology. In some cases, these machines are QR code or RFID enabled, so they're connecting the piece of packaging to the consumer, and that's what you use to access the collection points. But the sort of non-tech enabled, the simpler collection points are also really effective depending on the context. You can see in some cases it's just a drop point. It may be shaped just to accept one kind of packaging, but increasingly, and as more kind of packaging formats come online here, there are collection points that can really take a variety of formats, a variety of different types of packaging from multiple different companies or uh, for multiple different kinds of products. So that's collection points. And this is, as Claudette said, really the star of our show today. These are the washing facilities where reusable packaging is washed and then packed and redistributed, and then to be redistributed again to users. And you can see that these are, these are not the kind of dishwasher that you might see behind a bar. These are pretty sophisticated washing operations, large industrial machines that can do, hundreds up to hundreds of thousands of containers in a day, and are processing millions and millions of containers year over year. And one of the things that we are going to talk about today is how these facilities really kind of fall in a regulatory and inspection gray area because they're clearly not restaurants. They're not really food manufacturing facilities, but they do handle food, or at least they handle food waste, and they do deal with food contact surfaces or future food contact surfaces. And so it's important that they have, they go through inspection, that quality assurance is being provided. But up until now, there hasn't really been an inspection scheme or a program that's really been unique and dedicated to these kinds of washing facilities. And that's one of the gaps that we're trying to cover with our standard. And again, this is not that's backwards. This is not sort of a hypothetical. This is something that you'll likely encounter in your work. You can see here in the North America, there are about 70 of these kind of washing facilities, many in the US and many in Canada as well. And especially if you're on one of our coasts here, it's, I think, not unlikely that you may see a facility like this in your duties, in your inspection duties going forward, or you might be working with a facility like this if you're in industry or in retail and want to offer reusable packaging. So just wanted to share this map to kind of show this is not, this is happening now. This is real and not a hypothetical, but kind of the current state of play. And then the last node here that we just wanted to highlight, this is actually the same facility that the washing machines are in. You can kind of see it down here. The final step is the packing of the clean containers after they're washed to be redistributed back out for use again. And this is another place where there wasn't a ton of guidance on how to do that, how to maintain how to prevent contamination, how to maintain the cleanliness of containers after they've been washed. And so in the guidance, and Claudette will talk about this, that we provide in the standard, there's a whole array of things that are really unique to reuse. Some things around how to make sure that clean containers are separated, remain separated from clean containers as they move through the facility, how to pack them, how to seal those packages so that they don't become contaminated again. And then, safe ways to store them. You can see that, these are pretty large scale operations. This is, I think, you're looking at 2 million different kinds of containers here. And so the storage also becomes an issue when you're talking about reuse and how to make sure that these containers remain clean before they're used. I think I'm handing it back to you, Claudette.
Yeah, here is just a list of where you might see these kinds of systems emerging, and I have them listed in the order of how quickly they're scaling. So the number one space in the US where these systems are scaling is in stadiums and theaters. These kinds of closed systems where they have they go through large volumes of cups and snack boxes and things like that in one afternoon or one evening. Scaling quite quickly, there's some pictures of some big stadiums here that have commitments to reusable packaging. And sometimes it's the stadium, sometimes it's the professional sports team that plays there that has the commitment, and other times it's performers. So there's a picture of Billie Eilish here because she's one of the performers that was using reusable packaging at her performances. So the stadium would offer reusable packaging when she was there. And so things are quickly scaling in this market. It's a really effective place for reuse because consumers consume the product on site and return the packaging immediately, so they have high collection rates. But we also see this at festivals where there's a lot of waste at festivals. So festivals are another good space for this. Festivals move in and out of cities, and there's struggles with businesses as they move into a city and offer reusables temporarily through a festival. Are they licensed? How do they get approval to do that? And so it's another place that something might temporarily come through your region. Schools and corporate campuses are great places too, where this is scaling, because you can sort of train the students or the workers and how to handle the reusable packaging and return it. And we do have some examples of citywide systems that are being built around the world. A lot of cities in Europe are going in this direction. So this means a lot of restaurants, a lot of cafes in a particular neighborhood are converting and having public collection points where after you're done with the packaging, you return it either in public spaces and supermarkets. Some of these places have curbside collection as well. So a lot of different places this is scaling, growing quite quickly. There's also some states here in the US that are promoting, encouraging reuse. You can see on the next slide, there's 7 states, I believe, that have some sort of regulation. Usually these are states that have passed extended producer responsibility. So regulations that make whoever puts the packaging into the world required to cover the costs of managing the waste. And in these 7 states, there's some provisions that encourage or support financially or even set targets for the use of reusable packaging. So these are 7 states where you might see these systems emerge more quickly than other places. And with all of these different places moving to reuse, we really, most of these companies have been operating independently, and they've been setting up their own systems. But as these states and cities and neighborhoods bump up against each other, we need to ensure some interoperability. So we want this to be easy for consumers to use. So we have this vision presented here in this slide of having a variety of different types of packaging formats from different businesses, all being able to go into the same collection point. And we wanted to have insurance that when it goes in there, it'll be properly sorted and cleaned safely so that it can be reused again. And so our role at PR3, one of the main things we've been doing is developing a set of standards that would align all these diverse stakeholders as they build reuse infrastructure. And standards are really the language that industry speaks, as I'm sure a lot of you listening today know. This is how we help accelerate behavior change. It's how we ensure our systems are safe. And it's also how we ensure interoperability, which is going to be important in reuse. I have some pictures here of different industries that have standardized. So cell phones is one thing. You can go anywhere in the world and your cell phone works, and it's sort of behind the scenes, the manufacturers and the companies that operate our cell phones have committed to the same set of standards for making sure they work the same way. So our phones can be used anywhere. Same with our bank cards or credit cards. The infrastructure is all the same around the world, so we can easily use our bank cards wherever we go. And we think reuse, similarly, a set of standards is going to help reuse scale. And so this is what we've been working on.
And I suspect Claudette's right that this audience is more familiar with standards than many of the audience that we speak to. As Carrie said in her opening, Reuseable, which is PR3's parent organization, PR3 is an initiative of it, has become accredited as a American National Standards Institute accredited standards developer, which means that the process that we're going through in the development of the standards and the washing standard that we're going to talk more about today have met these or have followed these kind of principles for proper standards development. We formed a consensus body. As you probably know, the way something becomes a standard is that all of the kind of affected experts and stakeholders in the space agree, yes, this is the thing that should be the standard, and that consensus body has balance, and we go through a transparent development process, including public comment periods and open ballots. And so we really take seriously the openness of our process. We'll get to some of the people who are and organizations that are participating. It's a very large, relatively large consensus body that's working on this with us. Because we are based in the US, we are accredited by ANSI. We do also have a formal relationship with CSA Group. We're developing these binationally with CSA Group. And so there'll be national standards in Canada as well as in the US. But the consensus body that were formed is an international group. So we really try not to just have a North American bias. We have people that are participating from Europe and from Southeast Asia and from Australia. I think it's actually dozen plus countries that are directly participating in our consensus body. So we really hope that these standards work as well in Jakarta as they do in Seattle, and are engaging stakeholders to help us achieve that. And then the one other thing that I wanted to mention is that all of PR3's standards so far have been developed with donated money. This is an industry right now. It's not a crazy lucrative industry, reusable packaging. And honestly, a lot of the entrepreneurs that are working on this, at least in my experience, are doing it as much, if not more, for the environmental promise of reuse as the sort of business, the business returns that they might get. And so we are offering PR3 standards free of charge because we want to make sure that they're accessible to especially the small and medium-sized enterprises that we think are going to be the main ones using them. And speaking of, we just want to give you a sense of what our consensus body looks like. We call it our standards panel. Half of this group is representatives from industry. You'll see sort of big names that you recognize here, your Nestle's and Targets and Unilevers. But you'll also see on the right side a whole collection, 24 or more organizations you may not be familiar with. Again, these are those small and medium-sized reuse companies that are just doing the washing or just doing the inventory management of reusable packaging. And there are associations around the world that are emerging to support these kind of companies. You'll see them listed there. We have many of them participating in our standards body, as well as the manufacturers of reusable packaging. So again, the balance of our group is such that 50% is industry, and the other half is represented here on this slide. One of the things that we really don't have an interest in doing is replacing single-use packaging system with a reusable packaging system that, has some of the same failures or the same risks of the single-use, like the waste problem of single-use packaging and sometimes the safety problem. And so we have a whole other half of our panel that's focused on things like environmental advocates, human health advocates, folks who understand sort of toxicity in materials and making sure that the materials that are used in reusables and the washing agents that are used to wash reusables are all safe for food contact containers. We also have people representing labor in all different kinds of labor contexts around the world, whether that's kind of organized labor that you might see here, or informal workers who are doing waste picking and collection in Asia and other regions. And then we also have a number of communities and governments. One of the things, as Claudette mentioned, that is happening more and more is that whole communities or whole cities are working to stand up kind of a city scale reusable packaging system. And so we have some of the communities that are doing that actually involved here, because that's where standardization and interoperability become especially important, is when there's these large scale open loop systems. So that is kind of the overview of what reuse is and the panel that's developing PR3's standards. And what Claudette is going to do kind of for the rest of the presentation is dive us into the washing standard that is kind of the focus, is the first published standard and is the focus of our presentation. We want to talk about what it covers because it's most relevant to this audience and food inspectors. But just wanted to kind of put on screen here the other standards that are in development. These largely mirror the diagram that Claudette showed at the beginning of the presentation. We have a standard for container design, for a digital language to help people exchange data in reuse systems, for marking and labeling to help consumers sort of be able to identify something as a reusable versus a recyclable or a compostable, standard for those collection points, and then also a standard for kind of the operations and performance of the system as a whole. And this is something that's really important as both companies, but also communities and cities are looking to hit, whether it's waste diversion targets or climate targets or whatever it might be. We're setting certain minimum benchmarks for the kind of effectiveness that reuse systems need to achieve to actually deliver on a environmental performance. So that's just a snapshot of the full suite, and then Claudette will dive into the washing standard in particular.
Yeah, so this standard is the first of our standards to be finalized and published. We published this officially on July 28th this year. And one of the reasons it was published first is because when we started this work and asked our panel, which order do we want to go in terms of developing the standards, washing emerged as one of the most crucial ones because there are so many regulatory gaps right now, and they wanted something to point and help educate the inspectors that they were working with on what are the things to look for in these facilities. And so we started this development of the standard a couple of years ago, and it's just published this summer. And let me show you the sort of table of contents for the standard, which you'll see it's quite comprehensive. It talks about the facility and how to sort of organize, lay out the facility so it's safest. It talks about employees and how to train them and how to protect them. It goes through the whole washing process from pre-cleaning through drying. And then it talks about inspection, best practices for inspection, and how to pack them for distribution. And of course, how to standardize the record keeping so we can have standardized data on these facilities. And what you'll see is on the next slide here, what you'll see is these requirements here that are highlighted in orange. These are taken almost directly from US FDA food code. And basically, probably most of you are very familiar with the food code. It's a really lengthy document, and a lot of it deals with food. And these facilities, like Mason said, they're not processing food or manufacturing food, but they're processing food contact surfaces in the packaging. And so what we did is we looked at, as a starting point, we looked at the food code and pulled out all the sections of food code that relate to the food contact surfaces. And so we have the same requirements in the standard that are in the food code for washing those surfaces, but in a much easier to read format, right? So we've distilled the pieces relevant to the packaging down to like a dozen pages within this standard. So it makes it much easier to pull out the right requirements. And when you do look at this standard, you'll see a lot of things you probably recognize, which are things like contact times and temperatures and pressures and things that are needed in the cleaning and sanitization process. We've kept the same requirements, so we haven't changed them. And you'll even see on the next slide here, we have quite detailed tables within the standard about pH levels and temperatures and all the things that you would probably, that were taken directly from the food code. So all of that remains. And then what we've done is written new standards for the pieces of the reuse system that's not covered by food code. So everything in purple here are the things that food code didn't have enough information on, so we had to develop it ourselves. And what that amounts to is is a section on the facility requirements. So how to lay out the facility so that the clean containers and the dirty containers don't come into contact with each other, and the best ways to prevent the workers in the facility to avoid contamination as well. So we've put best practices in the standard for how to do that. We've also have new requirements about how to protect workers and equipment. These facilities are very hot sometimes and very humid because they're dealing with a lot of hot water. And so we want to ensure that workers are adequately protected in these environments. And we also want to ensure that the equipment's protected, because what we found in these facilities, these pioneering facilities, is that in a lot of cases, they were finding that the backup batteries for sensors in this equipment were corroding really quickly, which is obviously important to recognize and prevent, because the backup sensors are what tells them if something's not washing properly. So crucial. So we've put best practices in there for the facility itself. Then we've written requirements for the inspection process. So after washing, how do we ensure that the packaging is clean and ready for reuse? There's nothing in the food code about that. So we've learned what the best practices are from industry to date, and we've put all that into the standard. We've learned that it's really important, especially in the beginning when you're getting to know your new equipment, to test regularly, because we need to adequately calibrate the machinery. And so inspections most important early on. We've put in the standard, what is the best equipment products to use for inspection? What is effective and affordable in the inspection space? So we've written that in there. And then we have two more sections on the next slide that we've written sort of from scratch as well. One is the packaging, the repacking process. So as you saw in the pictures, this packaging is usually put into bins that are sealed, and we've put best practices for how to seal those so that as this packaging moves, normally in most cases after the packaging is clean, it moves to new locations for refilling. So we want to have some assurance that the packaging hasn't been contaminated along that supply route. So we've written in there the best ways to seal and protect the packaging while it's in the transport route. And then finally, as Mason mentioned, a lot of these companies are being supported by impact investors and governments, and we need to, that are interested in knowing the impacts of these systems. So we're standardizing documentation on the kinds of energy and water and chemical usage in these facilities so that we can ensure that they're beneficial and making an impact. So we've standardized that as well in the record keeping section. So we're proud of this work. It's comprehensive. It's available on our website now, and we encourage anyone who is called upon to inspect these facilities to take a look at the standard and use it in your inspection process. We also are setting up a certification program for these facilities, these wash facilities. That's coming soon. We should have more information on that in the next several months. But there'll be a way to certify that these facilities follow all the requirements within the standard, and some new additional tools coming soon to help inspectors or facility owners make sure they're meeting the requirements as well. And like I think, like we mentioned, washing is the first standard that we finalized, and you'll see a list here of the other ones that are coming soon. The next one to be finalized soon is our container design standard, which is talks about how to ensure that the packaging itself is appropriate for reuse, that the surface and the angles and corners and the durability and the materials used are appropriate for reuse. And then the other standards will be following shortly after. And then let me turn it back over to Mason for any closing comments.
Yeah, I don't have much to close out here. We, of course, welcome any questions from the group right now. And I also know that standard is one of those things that is kind of dense, and you might have to kind of look at it and sit with it and to formulate questions. And so encourage you to take down this email address here. This QR code goes to our website where you can find both the washing standard and drafts of the other standards that are emerging. And so happy to answer questions now and answer questions via email if they come to you later after you've had a chance to look through the standard.
All right, great. Thank you, Mason and Claudette. That was really informative. So I'm here based in St. Paul, Minnesota, and I didn't realize that there's a reuse facility just over in Minneapolis. So it seems like uh, so that's why I'm really glad that we are bringing this to our AFTO members, because it might be in your area as you showed on the map, but you might not be familiar with it. Yeah, open for questions. You can raise your hand, put your questions in the Q&A. I don't see any at this point, but I'd be particularly interested for folks maybe who have seen some of these facilities and kind of share your experience. So um, while
That would
yeah, please
that
go
would be
ahead.
really interesting if anyone has actually been out to inspect one. If you're getting called, that would be, yeah, good to know.
While we're waiting for questions to come in, you had mentioned about the regulatory gray area. Can you say a little bit more about that and how you hope this set of standards and guidance might help kind of bridge that gap?
Yeah, and I can start and Claudette fill in with anything here, but one of the things that we heard actually even, last year and before the standard was out and published, we had folks like I think the kind of folks who are on the call who are maybe it's their public health department or maybe it's, you're an inspector of some sort and they have encountered this and they weren't quite sure like what to do, right? And so they are working with that facility to develop some sort of bespoke inspection, and there's some education that's happening back and forth. Like this is what reuse, kind of like the presentation we just did, right? But it's happening on the fly and in the middle of sort of your everyday business operations. And so many of those health departments actually reached out to us and were saying like, this is something that we could use guidance on. We're really happy that you're working on this standard because then it's a tool that we can give to our inspectors and other folks to so they don't have to make it up, And the other benefit of that is that then the sort of requirements and the quality assurance that you get become consistent across, jurisdictions, and it's not up to there's not too many differences between, if you are in Minneapolis versus St. Paul, right? And so that's another benefit to standardizing this.
There's also, we have some examples of companies in the reuse space that are providing packaging to consumer brands or to in cafeteria settings where they're working with big food service companies. And they're required to have inspections of their facilities. And even those in that corporate setting, no one really knew what inspection to follow. So what did they look for? And so hopefully even in that private setting in food manufacturing type of inspection process, we can be helpful.
Great. We do have a question from Zara. What sanitation process is preferred? Hot water sanitation or chemical sanitation?
It's a good question. We actually we don't state the preferred method in the standard. We allow for all of them, but I will say two things. We had, as Mason said, our consensus body has some experts in public health, and they were concerned about the use of chlorine because it has impacts on workers, both at the chlorine manufacturing facilities and the workers in these facilities. And so there is a recommendation against the use of chlorine. It's in some cases, it's what the equipment requires, the washing equipment requires. And so we do allow it, but we recommend against it where possible. And some of the biggest machinery, the machinery and some of the imagery that Mason showed is actually using heat, which is great because then they don't have to purchase the chemicals and have to worry about the safety of the chemicals. And so I would say most of those big facilities that we've seen are using just hot water, which seems really effective.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I appreciated the call out that you had put you mentioned earlier about double checking your instruments, instrumentation and your equipment, and it not might, to make sure it's going to withstand that high humidity if you are using something that's caustic. I think that was a really good call out. Yeah. Yeah, thank you for your question. Other questions? Right, well, I am not seeing any. So I want to thank everyone for participating in today's webinar. Please look for a post-webinar email, which will include access to the recorded session, a PDF version of the presentation, and a link to the standard. I also put a link in the chat if you want to hop on and grab that now. And also be on the lookout for more presentations in this series next month. So October 17th, Karen Everstein will be joining us to talk about food fraud. So once again, thank you, Mason and Claudette. I really appreciate it. And yeah, I will be reading up on the standard.
Thanks for having us. Thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you.